She had been holding someone's life in her hands for the past 40 minutes. The young soldier's face was pale, his breathing shallow, but her fingers moved with practiced confidence as she worked to stop the bleeding. Around her, the sounds of the medical tent filled the air. Groans of pain, hurried footsteps, the steady beep of monitors. This was her world now. This was what she was good at. "You're going to be fine," she told him softly, meeting his frightened eyes. "I've got you. Just keep breathing with me." Her name was Elena Rodriguez, though most people in the field just called her Doc. She had been working as a medic in conflict zones for 3 years now, moving from one crisis to another, always going where she was needed most. Her hands were steady, her mind was sharp, and she had a gift for staying calm when everything around her was falling apart. The other medics respected her. The soldiers trusted her. The locals in whatever village or town they were stationed in would often bring their children to her, knowing she would help anyone who needed it. She had saved more lives than she could count, and she never asked for recognition or praise. She just did the work. But there was something about Elena that nobody knew, something she had buried so deep that sometimes even she forgot it was there. Before she became a medic, before she dedicated her life to healing, Elena had been someone completely different. She had grown up in a small town where hunting and shooting were just part of life. Her father owned a gun range, and from the time she was 12 years old, she had spent every weekend there learning to shoot. She wasn't just good at it. She was exceptional. By the time she was 17, she had won multiple state championships in competitive shooting. Her coaches said she had a natural gift, the kind of steady hand and sharp eye that couldn't be taught. She could hit targets at distances that amazed even experienced marksmen. She understood wind, distance, and timing in a way that seemed almost instinctive. Her younger brother, Tommy, had looked up to her. He wanted to be just like his big sister. She taught him everything she knew, spending hours at the range with him, showing him how to breathe, how to focus, how to let everything else fade away until there was nothing but you and the target. Tommy loved it. He had the same natural talent she did, and Elena was proud of him. They talked about competing together, maybe even going to nationals someday. Their father would joke that the Rodriguez kids were going to put their little town on the map, but then everything changed. Tommy was 19 when it happened. He had been at a party with some friends when an argument broke out. Someone pulled a gun. In the chaos and confusion, Tommy was shot. He died before the ambulance even arrived. Elena's world shattered that night. The police said it was a tragic accident, that Tommy had been trying to break up the fight, that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Elena couldn't stop thinking about all those hours at the range, all those lessons she had taught him, all the times she had put a gun in his hands and told him how to use it. She blamed herself. She blamed the guns. She blamed the whole culture she had grown up in. And she made a decision that would change everything. She would never touch a weapon again, never. Instead, she would dedicate her life to saving people, to undoing the violence she felt she had somehow contributed to. She sold all her equipment, stopped going to the range, and enrolled in medical school with a focus on emergency medicine. Her father didn't understand. Her old friends from the shooting circuit tried to reach out, but she cut them all off. She needed a clean break from that life, from that version of herself. The girl who could shoot a target at 1,000 yards didn't exist anymore. Now there was only the medic, the healer, the one who ran toward danger to save lives instead of end them. And for 3 years, that's exactly what she had been. She had patched up hundreds of wounded soldiers and civilians. She had delivered babies in makeshift clinics. She had held dying people's hands and given them comfort in their final moments. She had found purpose in this work, found a way to make peace with her past. The team she worked with had no idea about any of it. As far as they were concerned, she was just Doc, the quiet, competent medic who could handle anything medical, but who always stayed away from the weapons training sessions. Some of the soldiers joked about it sometimes, asking if she wanted to learn how to shoot, offering to teach her for self-defense. She always smiled and declined. "That's what I have you guys for," she would say. "You keep us safe, I keep you alive." That's the deal. They accepted that. After all, why would a medic need combat training? That wasn't her job. Her job was to heal, and she was the best at it. The commander of their unit, a tough veteran named Captain Barnes, had complete faith in her abilities. "Rodriguez is the best field medic I've ever worked with," he told new arrivals. "If you get hit, you want her working on you. She's saved more lives than anyone else in this outfit." Elena appreciated the confidence, but she never let it go to her head. Every life she saved felt like a small step toward redemption, toward balancing the scales for Tommy's death. She knew it didn't really work that way, that nothing would bring her brother back, but it gave her something to hold on to. The medical outpost where she was stationed sat in a dusty compound surrounded by makeshift walls and sandbags. It wasn't much to look at, but it had everything they needed: surgical equipment, medicine, beds for patients, and a dedicated staff of medics and nurses who worked around the clock. The region they were in was technically stable, but everyone knew that could change at any moment. There were still active militant groups in the surrounding areas, still villages caught in the crossfire of old conflicts. That's why they were there, to provide medical support to both military personnel and civilians caught in the chaos. Elena had learned to sleep through the sound of distant gunfire. She had learned to eat quickly, to always keep her medical bag packed and ready, to never get too comfortable. This was just how life worked out here. You stayed alert, you did your job, and you didn't think too much about what might happen tomorrow. The young soldier she had been treating finally stabilized. His color was better, his breathing steady. She gave him something for the pain and made sure the IV was secure. "Get some rest," she told him. "You're going to be fine." He grabbed her hand weakly. "Thank you, Doc, you're amazing." She smiled and patted his shoulder before moving on to the next patient. There was always another patient. That was the one constant in her life now. There were always more people who needed help, always more work to be done. As she walked across the compound that evening, the sun setting over the dusty horizon, Elena felt the familiar sense of purpose that had carried her through the last 3 years. This was her life now. This was who she was. The past was behind her, buried and done. She had no way of knowing that everything was about to change, that in just a few days she would be forced to confront the very thing she had run from, that the skills she had sworn to never use again would be the only thing standing between life and death. But for now, in this moment, she was just Doc, just the medic, just the healer, and that was exactly what she wanted to be. The call came in at dawn. Elena was drinking her second cup of terrible coffee when Captain Barnes walked into the medical tent with that look on his face, the one that meant they had a situation. "We've got a problem," he said, spreading a map across one of the supply crates. "There's a village about 20 miles north. Intelligence says they came under attack 2 days ago. We're getting reports of at least 12 civilians trapped there with serious injuries. Some of them are children." Elena felt her stomach tighten. Children. It was always harder when children were involved. "What's the situation on the ground?" she asked, studying the map. "Unclear. The fighting has moved on, but the village is isolated. No medical facilities, no way to evacuate the wounded. We need to go in, assess the injuries, and extract anyone who needs immediate care." He looked at her directly. "I need you on this one, Rodriguez. You're the best we've got." She nodded without hesitation. "When do we leave?" 2 hours. I'm taking a small team. 4 soldiers for security, you for medical. Light and fast. We go in, get the wounded, and get out before dark." The plan sounded straightforward enough. They had run dozens of missions like this before. But something about this one made Elena uneasy. Maybe it was the fact that the village was so isolated. Maybe it was the vague intelligence reports. Or maybe it was just the feeling you got after spending enough time in a war zone. That sense that things could go wrong in a heartbeat. She spent the next 2 hours preparing. She packed her medical bag with everything she might need: bandages, tourniquets, antibiotics, painkillers, surgical tools, IV fluids. She triple-checked her supplies, making sure she had enough for multiple casualties. When you went into the field, you couldn't just run back for something you forgot. The team assembled at the motor pool. Besides Captain Barnes and Elena, there were 4 soldiers: Rodriguez, Chen, Williams, and Jackson. All of them were experienced, capable fighters who had been through countless missions together. They knew how to work as a unit, how to watch each other's backs. Chen gave Elena a friendly nod as she climbed into the vehicle. "Don't worry, Doc, we'll keep you safe out there," she smiled. "I know you will. Just try not to get shot so I don't have to work on you." "No promises," he laughed. They rolled out as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The landscape outside was harsh and beautiful at the same time. Brown hills, scattered trees, the occasional abandoned building. This whole region had been fought over for so long that sometimes it was hard to remember what peace even looked like here. Elena sat in the back of the vehicle, watching the scenery pass by. She thought about the children waiting in that village, wondered how badly they were hurt, whether she would have the skills and supplies to help them. She always thought about this before a mission, running through scenarios in her head, preparing herself mentally for whatever she might find. About an hour into the drive, she started noticing things that didn't sit right. Shell casings on the road, too fresh to be from old battles. Tire tracks that looked recent. An abandoned checkpoint that showed signs of use within the last day or two. "Captain," she called forward. "Are you seeing this?" Barnes was already scanning the area with binoculars. "Yeah, I don't like it either. Stay alert, everyone." Williams, who was driving, slowed down slightly. "Think it's militia?" "Could be. Could also be bandits or looters. Either way, keep your eyes open." The tension in the vehicle ratcheted up a notch. Elena found herself gripping her medical bag a little tighter. The soldiers checked their weapons, their casual banter replaced by focused silence. They continued on, moving more cautiously now. Elena's unease grew with every mile. She had learned to trust her instincts out here, and right now her instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. But they had wounded civilians waiting for them, children who needed help. They couldn't just turn back because of a bad feeling. The village appeared on the horizon as the afternoon sun began its descent. Even from a distance, Elena could see the damage. Collapsed buildings, scorched walls, debris scattered everywhere. The destruction was recent, the fires barely cooled. "God," Chen muttered. "They really hit this place hard." Barnes ordered a slow approach, scanning for any signs of hostile presence. The village appeared deserted except for a few figures moving near what looked like an old community center. As they got closer, Elena could see people waving, civilians looking desperate and afraid. The vehicle rolled to a stop near the center of the village. Elena grabbed her medical bag and jumped out, her eyes immediately assessing the scene. She counted 14 people visible, several of them clearly injured. One woman was crying, pointing toward a building where more wounded were sheltered. "Rodriguez, Chen, secure a perimeter," Barnes ordered. Williams Jackson helped Doc set up. "I'm calling in our position." Elena was already moving toward the wounded. Years of training took over, and she shifted into the mental space where nothing existed except the immediate medical needs in front of her. Triage. That was always the first step. Figure out who needs help most urgently. An elderly man with a deep laceration across his shoulder, a teenage boy with what looked like a broken leg, a woman with shrapnel wounds in her side. And then she saw her, a little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, sitting against a wall with blood soaking through a makeshift bandage on her abdomen. Elena's heart clenched. The girl's face was pale, her breathing shallow. Shrapnel wound, probably internal bleeding. This was bad. She knelt beside the child, speaking softly in the local dialect she had picked up over the years. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name is Elena. I'm here to help you. Can you tell me your name?" The girl's eyes focused on her with difficulty. "Amira," she whispered. "Amira. That's a beautiful name." "I'm going to take care of you, okay? You're going to be fine." She carefully peeled back the bandage to assess the wound. It was worse than she thought. The girl needed surgery, needed a real hospital, but for now Elena would have to stabilize her enough for transport. As she worked, setting up an IV line and preparing to clean the wound, she was aware of the activity around her. Williams helping with the other wounded. Jackson distributing water to the civilians. Chen and Rodriguez taking up positions at the edges of the village. Barnes on the radio coordinating extraction. The girl, Amira, grabbed Elena's hand. Her grip was weak but desperate. "Please," she said in broken English. "Please don't let me die. I'm scared." Elena felt something crack inside her chest. The girl's eyes reminded her of Tommy. That same look of fear and trust mixed together. That same desperate hope that someone would save them. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you," Elena promised, squeezing the small hand gently. "I promise. You're going to be okay." She meant it. She would do whatever it took to keep this child alive. Whatever it took. She had just started cleaning the wound when she heard it. A sound that made every instinct she had developed over 3 years in war zones suddenly scream in alarm. The low rumble of multiple vehicles approaching. Moving fast. Coming from the north. Chen's voice cut through the air, sharp with tension. "Captain, we've got incoming." Multiple vehicles. Elna's hands froze for just a second. She looked up and saw Barnes's face go pale as he raised his binoculars. "Militia," he said, and that one word changed everything. "It's an ambush." We walked right into an ambush. Time seemed to slow down. Elena looked at the wounded around her, at the elderly man, the teenage boy, the woman with shrapnel wounds. At little Amira, whose hand still gripped hers with desperate trust. She looked at her team, at the 4 soldiers who were suddenly scrambling for defensive positions, at Captain Barnes already shouting into the radio for immediate extraction. She heard him clearly. "This is Bravo 6. We are under attack. I repeat, we are under attack.
We need immediate evac."
"ETA, over." The response came back crackling with static. "Bravo 6, fastest response is 40 minutes. Hold position. Air support is en route, 40 minutes. Elena's mind raced. 40 minutes might as well be forever. The vehicles were already visible now, kicking up dust as they raced toward the village. She could see men with weapons in the truck beds, could see the mounted gun on one of the vehicles. They were outnumbered, outgunned, trapped in an exposed position with wounded civilians and no real cover. "Doc," Barnes shouted. "Get everyone inside the community center." "Now," Elena snapped back into action. "Everyone who can walk, move. Help the wounded." Into the building now. People started scrambling, panic setting in. Elena scooped Amira into her arms, careful of her IV line, and ran for the building. Williams was helping the elderly man. Jackson was carrying the teenage boy. Everyone moved with desperate speed. The first shots rang out before they even reached the door. The sound of bullets hitting stone and earth filled the air. Chen and Rodriguez returned fire, trying to buy them time. Elena burst through the door of the community center, her heart pounding. Amira clutched tight against her chest. The little girl was crying now, terrified. Elena set her down as gently as she could in the corner of the building, her mind racing through impossible calculations. How many attackers? How much ammunition did they have? How long could they hold out? What were the chances extraction would arrive in time? Outside, the gunfire intensified. This wasn't a skirmish or a warning. This was a full assault. Whoever these people were, they had been waiting for a team to respond to the distress call. They had been ready, and Elena and her team had walked right into their trap. The world exploded into chaos. Elena pressed herself against the wall of the community center, her arms instinctively wrapped around Amira as bullets tore through the air outside. The sound was deafening, the crack of rifles, the deeper boom of the mounted gun, the sharp ping of rounds hitting metal and stone. Through the broken windows, she could see Chen and Rodriguez taking cover behind their vehicle, returning fire at the approaching trucks. Captain Barnes was beside them, coordinating their defense while trying to maintain radio contact with command. Williams and Jackson had taken positions at the corners of the building, their rifles aimed at the advancing militia forces. The civilians huddled in the center of the room, terrified and crying. The elderly man Elena had treated earlier was praying quietly. The teenage boy with the broken leg was trembling uncontrollably. A woman clutched 2 small children to her chest, whispering frantically to them in their native language. Elena did a quick count. 14 civilians inside, including Amira. 4 soldiers outside, fighting. Captain Barnes coordinating. And her, the medic, the one person in this entire situation who had no combat training, no weapon, no way to fight back. Except that wasn't true. And that truth was a weight she had been carrying for 3 years. "Stay down," she shouted to the civilians, switching between English and the local dialect. "Keep away from the windows." She moved to the doorway, staying low, trying to assess the situation. What she saw made her blood run cold. There were at least 3 trucks full of militia fighters spreading out around the village. Maybe 20 men total, possibly more. They moved with tactical precision, using the damaged buildings for cover as they advanced. Her team was outnumbered 4-1, maybe 5-1, and the mounted gun on one of the trucks was already tearing chunks out of their vehicle's cover. This was bad. This was really bad. Chen suddenly cried out and stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. Even from the doorway, Elena could see the blood spreading across his uniform. "Chen's hit," Rodriguez shouted. Elena's training overrode her fear. She ran out. Chen a crouch, ignoring the bullets kicking up dirt around her, and grabbed Chen under his good arm. He was heavy, dead weight, but adrenaline gave her strength. She dragged him back toward the building while Rodriguez laid down covering fire. They made it through the door, and Elena immediately lowered Chen to the ground, her hands already assessing the wound. Shoulder hit, through and through. Painful but not immediately life-threatening if she could stop the bleeding. "You're okay," she told him, pulling supplies from her medical bag. Bullet went clean through. "Hold still." "Doc, I can still fight," Chen gasped, trying to sit up. "The hell you can. You're going into shock. Stay down and let me work." She packed the wound front and back, applied pressure, started an IV to counter the blood loss. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory from 3 years of field medicine taking over. But part of her mind was somewhere else, calculating angles and distances, analyzing the tactical situation in a way she had sworn she would never do again. The mounted gun opened up again, and this time the rounds punched through the wall of the building. Elena threw herself over Chen as debris rained down. The civilians screamed. One of the women was hit by a piece of flying stone, a gash opening on her forehead. "They're going to shred this building," Williams shouted from his position. "This cover won't hold." Captain Barnes scrambled through the door, his face grim. "Extraction is 35 minutes out. We've got to hold until then, 35 minutes. Elena looked around the building, looked at the terrified civilians, at little Amira, who was starting to go pale from blood loss despite the IV, at Chen, wounded and unable to fight, at walls that were already starting to crumble under the sustained fire. They weren't going to make it. Not like this, another burst of gunfire. Jackson suddenly jerked and fell backward, his rifle clattering to the floor. Elena saw the blood spreading across his chest, center mass hit, possibly lung or heart involvement. "Jackson!" Rodriguez screamed. Elena ran to him, already knowing it was bad. She ripped open his vest, pressed her hands against the wound, but there was so much blood. Too much blood. She applied pressure, started chest compressions, did everything she had been trained to do, but she could feel his life slipping away under her hands. Come on," she whispered desperately. "Don't do this. Stay with me." Jackson's eyes met hers. There was understanding there and acceptance. He tried to say something but couldn't get the words out. His hand fumbled at his chest, pulling out a photo. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, smiling at the camera. "I'll tell her," Elena said, tears streaming down her face. "I'll tell her you were brave. I promise," he smiled faintly. And then he was gone. Elena sat back on her heels, her hands covered in blood, staring at the man she hadn't been able to save. Another person dead, another life she couldn't protect. The weight of it crashed over her like a wave. "Doc!" Williams' shout snapped her back. "We need you over here." The woman with the head wound had collapsed, bleeding heavily. Elena forced herself to move, to push past the grief and the horror, to do her job. She cleaned and bandaged the wound with shaking hands, checking for signs of concussion, making sure the woman was stable. But even as she worked, she could hear the battle turning against them. Rodriguez was yelling that he was almost out of ammunition. Williams took a round to the leg and went down hard. Captain Barnes was trying to drag him to safety while returning fire with his sidearm. The mounted gun swung toward the building again. This time Elena saw the gunner's intention clearly. He was going to rake the entire structure, tear it apart wall by wall until there was nothing left but rubble and corpses. Barnes made it inside with Williams, slamming the door behind him. Williams' leg was a mess, the femoral artery partially severed. Elena started working on him immediately, but she knew the truth. They had maybe 20 minutes before he bled out, and she didn't have the equipment for proper surgery here. "How many rounds do we have left?" Barnes demanded. Rodriguez checked his magazine. "Maybe 30 rounds total between me and you, sir." "That's it. 30 rounds against 20 militia fighters with an unlimited supply." The math was brutal and simple. They were going to be overrun in minutes, not hours. Barnes looked at Elena. Really looked at her. She saw him making calculations, running through options, realizing they had none. He was preparing himself to make a last stand, to go down fighting, taking as many of the enemy with him as he could. "Doc," he said quietly, "when they breach the building, I want you to take the civilians and try to get out through the back. Head east. Don't stop running." "They'll hunt us down in the open," Elena replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Maybe. But maybe some of you will make it. It's better than dying here." Behind her, Amira was crying. The little girl who reminded her so much of Tommy, the child she had promised to save. Elena looked at her, at those frightened eyes full of trust, and something inside her shifted. She heard her brother's voice in her head, clear as if he was standing right beside her. "You have a gift, sis. Mom always said gifts are meant to be used to help people, Any way you can. The mounted gun fired again. The wall to Elena's left disintegrated in a shower of concrete and dust. In seconds, they would breach the building. In seconds, everyone here would die. Williams grabbed her hand, his face pale. "Tell my kids I love them," he gasped. "Tell them yourself," Elena said. She looked at him, at Chen, at all the wounded people depending on her, at Captain Barnes preparing to make a hopeless last stand, at Rodriguez clutching his nearly empty rifle, at Amira crying in the corner. She thought about her vow, about the 3 years she had spent running from who she used to be, about Tommy and the guilt she carried like a stone around her neck, about all the lives she had saved with her medical skills and all the people she was about to lose because she had refused to use any other skills she possessed. 3 feet away, she saw Jackson's rifle lying on the floor where he had dropped it. It was still loaded, still functional. Elena's hands were shaking as she stared at it. The weight of her promise to never touch a weapon again pressed down on her like a physical force, but the weight of letting everyone here die pressed down even harder. "I'm sorry, Tommy," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." She reached for the rifle. The moment her fingers closed around the grip, muscle memory flooded back like a dam breaking. The weight felt familiar in her hands despite the years. She checked the magazine automatically, 30 rounds fully loaded. She understood the weapon's balance, its sight picture, its effective range. Captain Barnes stared at her in complete shock. "Rodriguez, what are you—" "I need you to trust me," Elena said. Her voice was different now, focused, steady. "Keep everyone down and away from the windows. Cover your ears. Doc, you can't—" The door burst open. A militia fighter rushed in, rifle raised. Elena's body moved before her mind could catch up. She brought the rifle up smoothly, her stance perfect, her breathing controlled. For a fraction of a second, she was 17 again, on the range with Tommy, her father's voice in her ear. Breathe. Focus. Let everything else fade away. She fired. The shot was perfect. It hit the fighter's rifle, tearing it from his hands without killing him. He stumbled backward in shock and confusion, but more were coming. She could hear them moving outside, closing in for the final assault. The mounted gun was swinging toward the building again. Elena moved to the window. She looked out at the battlefield, and for the first time in 3 years she let herself see it not as a medic but as a marksman. She saw angles, distances, wind direction, firing patterns, weak points. She saw everything. "Get down," she told the room. "Everyone get down right now." And then she started to shoot. The first shot felt like opening a door she had locked 3 years ago. Elena's finger squeezed the trigger and the rifle kicked against her shoulder in a way that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. The bullet flew exactly where she intended, through the radiator of the nearest truck. Steam erupted from the engine and the vehicle lurched to a stop. She didn't think. Thinking would bring back the guilt, the memories, the weight of everything she had promised herself. So she let her body take over. Let years of training rise to the surface like muscle memory that had never really faded. The mounted gunner was swinging his weapon toward the building again. Elena tracked his movement, calculated the distance, about 200 meters, slight crosswind from the east. She exhaled slowly and fired. The shot hit the mounting bracket of the gun, causing it to jam and swing wildly off target. The gunner dove for cover, suddenly aware that someone dangerous was shooting back. Captain Barnes was staring at her with his mouth open. "What the hell?" "Later," Elena said, already tracking her next target. "Rodriguez, northwest corner, 3 fighters moving on your position. How do you—" "Trust me, northwest corner." Rodriguez swung his rifle around just as the 3 fighters appeared. Elena fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Each shot hit exactly where she aimed. One struck a fighter's rifle, sending it spinning from his hands. Another hit the ground inches from the second fighter's feet, causing him to stumble backward. The third shattered a window frame beside the third fighter's head, showering him with glass. She wasn't trying to kill them. Every shot was precisely calculated to disarm, to suppress, to control. She was us. Ing the weapon the same way she used her medical tools, with precision and purpose to save lives rather than take them. But saving lives through a rifle scope required a completely different kind of thinking. She had to see the battlefield not as a place of chaos, but as a 3-dimensional problem to be solved. Where were the threats? What were their firing positions? What were their sight lines? How could she force them to retreat or take cover without crossing the line into lethal force? The militia fighters had been expecting an easy victory against a wounded medical team. Instead, they were facing something they couldn't understand. Shots coming from impossible angles, hitting with surgical precision, neutralizing their advantages one by one. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Elena moved to a different window, staying low, constantly repositioning. She spotted 2 fighters trying to flank around the east side of the building. She fired twice. One shot hit the wall beside the first fighter's head. The other ricocheted off a metal pipe near the second one. Both men dove for cover. Their advance stopped cold. The mounted gun on the second truck opened fire, but Elena had already tracked its position. She aimed carefully and put 3 rounds into the truck's tire. The vehicle lurched sideways, and the gunner lost his aim, bullets sprang uselessly into the empty air. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Rodriguez breathed, watching in amazement. Elena didn't answer. She was too focused on the tactical situation. She counted at least 15 fighters still in the fight, though several were now hesitating, pulling back, unsure what they were dealing with. The aggression had drained from their assault. Doubt was creeping in, but they still had overwhelming numbers. And Elena was running low on ammunition, maybe 10 rounds left in this magazine, and she'd already burned through most of Jackson's spare mags. She needed to make every shot count. A fighter made a dash for the building, trying to reach the door. Elena tracked him smoothly and fired at the ground in front of him. Dirt exploded upward and he stumbled, falling hard. She shifted her aim to 2 more fighters, trying to use his run as cover. 2 shots, one hit a wooden post beside the first fighter's head, splinters flying. The other sparked off a metal barrel next to the second fighter. Both men scrambled backward to safer positions. She was controlling the battlefield, not through overwhelming firepower, but through precision and unpredictability. Every shot told the militia fighters that someone out there could see them, could hit them, could take them down at any moment. They couldn't locate where the shots were coming from because Elena kept moving, kept changing positions, kept them guessing. Behind her, Williams was staring in disbelief despite his pain.
"Doc, who the hell are you?"
"Someone I used to be," Elena muttered, swapping to her last magazine. 15 rounds left. She had to make them count. The militia commander, she could identify him by the way he was positioning his men, was shouting orders. She could see him trying to organize a coordinated assault, trying to overwhelm whatever defender was giving them so much trouble. He pointed toward the building and 6 fighters started moving forward in a disciplined formation. Elena took a breath. 6 targets, 15 rounds. The math worked, but barely. She fired at the leader's feet, forcing him to dive sideways. Before the others could react, she put a round through the arm of the fighter on the right, a flesh wound, painful but not fatal. He went down screaming and the formation broke. The other fighters scattered, looking for cover, their coordinated assault dissolving into chaos. 10 rounds left. The commander was yelling again, his frustration obvious even from this distance. He was pointing at the building, at the windows, trying to make his men understand where the shots were coming from. But Elena was moving again, repositioning, making herself impossible to pin down. She caught movement from the corner of her eye, 3 fighters trying to flank around the south side. She swung the rifle around, tracked them through the scope, and made a split-second decision. She fired at the wall above their heads, causing chunks of concrete to rain down on them. They dove for cover, their advance stopped. 7 rounds left. In the distance, she heard a sound that made her heart leap. The distinct thump-thump-thump of helicopter rotors. The extraction team was getting close. Maybe 10 minutes out, maybe less. They just had to hold on a little longer. The mounted gun on the second truck was being repositioned, the gunner trying to get a clean shot at the building despite the flat tire. Elena watched him work, calculated angles and distances, and made a decision. She aimed not at the gun, but at the ammunition belt feeding into it. 1 shot, perfectly placed. The belt jammed and the gun seized up, the gunner cursing and struggling to clear it. 5 rounds left. The militia commander was losing control of his men. She could see it in their body language and the way they were looking at each other instead of advancing. They had expected an easy fight and found themselves being picked apart by an invisible enemy who never missed. Some of them were already edging toward their vehicles, thinking about retreat. But some were angry now, pride wounded, determination hardening. 4 fighters broke from cover simultaneously, charging the building from different angles, trying to use speed and numbers to overwhelm the defense. Elena's training took over completely. She moved from window to window like water, smooth and unstoppable. First shot hit the lead fighter's rifle, tearing it from his hands. Second shot sparked off a metal drum beside the second fighter, causing him to flinch and stumble. Third shot hit the ground between the third fighter's legs, making him dive sideways. Fourth shot shattered a window beside the fourth fighter's head. 1 round left in the chamber. All 4 fighters had stopped their charge, taking cover, rattled by the precision. But Elena could see more gathering for another attempt. She needed more ammunition, needed more time, Here. Captain Barnes thrust his pistol toward her. 20 rounds, 9mm. Can you use it? Elena looked at the pistol, then at Barnes. He was staring at her with a mixture of awe and confusion, clearly trying to process what he was witnessing. She took the pistol, checked it automatically, and nodded. The helicopters were louder now. Maybe 5 minutes out, the militia commander made one last desperate play. He pointed at the building and shouted what was clearly a final assault order. Every remaining fighter opened fire simultaneously, laying down suppressive fire while half of them charged forward. Elena moved to the center of the building, positioning herself where she could cover multiple angles. The pistol was shorter range than the rifle, but at this distance it would work. She let the first wave of suppressive fire pass, wild, unfocused shooting meant to pin them down rather than hit anything. Then she started shooting back. The pistol barked in her hands, each shot deliberate and controlled. She hit a fighter's weapon, hit the ground near another's feet, hit a wall beside a third's head. Each shot forced someone to take cover, to hesitate, to lose momentum. She wasn't trying to kill. She was trying to break their will, to make them understand that continuing the assault was suicide. And it worked. The charge faltered. Fighters stopped running forward and started looking for cover instead. The mounted gun tried to fire, but the jammed ammunition belt wouldn't clear. The second truck, still on a flat tire, couldn't maneuver effectively. The helicopter sounds were very loud now, very close. Elena could see the militia commander shouting at his men, could see the calculation in his body language. He was weighing the cost of pressing the attack against an invisible defender who never missed, with helicopter gunships about to arrive overhead. He made his decision. He shouted a command and pointed back toward the trucks. The militia fighters started retreating, moving quickly, dragging their wounded with them. They weren't running exactly, but they weren't staying to fight either. Within 90 seconds, the trucks were pulling back, kicking up dust as they retreated from the village. The helicopters roared overhead a moment later, 2 attack birds and a transport chopper. They didn't need to fire a single shot. The militia was already gone, melting back into the landscape. Elena lowered the pistol. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline draining away and leaving her feeling hollow. She stared at the weapon in her grip, this thing she had sworn never to touch again, this tool that had just saved everyone's lives. Captain Barnes approached her slowly, like he was approaching a stranger. "Rodriguez, Doc, what just happened? How did you?" She looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I used to compete," she said quietly. "Before I became a medic, state champion. I was good. Really good. Good?" Rodriguez laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. "Doc, you just held off 20 armed fighters with a rifle and a pistol. That's not good. That's impossible." Williams finished, staring at her from where he lay on the floor. "That's impossible." Elena turned and saw all of them looking at her. Captain Barnes, Rodriguez, Chen clutching his wounded shoulder, Williams bleeding from his leg. The civilians huddled in the corner, staring at her like she had suddenly grown wings. Little Amira, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "I'm so sorry." She didn't know if she was apologizing to them or to herself or to Tommy's memory. Maybe all three. The evacuation was a blur. Elena moved through it on autopilot, back in medic mode, triaging the wounded, coordinating with the helicopter crew, making sure everyone was loaded safely. Williams and Chen needed immediate surgery. Amira needed hospital care. The civilian with the head wound needed observation for potential concussion. She worked efficiently, professionally, her hands steady even though something inside her felt shattered. She avoided looking at anyone's eyes. Couldn't bear to see the questions there, the confusion, the way they looked at her differently now. Jackson's body was loaded last, wrapped in a tarp, treated with the dignity he deserved. Elena stood beside the helicopter for a moment, her hand resting on the makeshift shroud. She thought about the little girl in the photo, The daughter who would grow up without her father. Another family destroyed. Another person she couldn't save. Captain Barnes appeared beside her. "We need to go, Doc." She nodded and climbed into the helicopter. As it lifted off, she looked down at the village growing smaller below. At the bullet-scarred walls, the damaged buildings, the place where everything had changed. The flight back to base took 40 minutes. Elena sat in the corner, staring at nothing. Around her, the crew worked on the wounded. Other medics doing the job she should be doing. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and she didn't trust herself to touch anyone right now. Amira was lying on a stretcher nearby, stabilized but still critical. The little girl's eyes found Elena's, and she reached out a small hand. Elena took it, squeezed gently, tried to smile. The girl smiled back, trusting, believing that the woman who had saved her life was someone good and brave. Elena wanted to believe that too. But all she could think about was the rifle in her hands, the shots she had fired, the line she had crossed after swearing she never would. When they landed at the base, everything moved fast. The wounded were rushed to surgery. The civilians were taken to a processing center. Captain Barnes was pulled into an immediate debrief with command. Elena tried to slip away to her quarters, but Rodriguez caught her arm. "Doc," he said quietly. "Thank you. You saved all of us. You know that, right?" She nodded but couldn't make words come out. "I don't know who you really are," he continued. "But I'm glad you were there." He walked away before she could respond. Selena stood in the empty corridor, feeling more alone than she had in years. Over the next week, the story spread through the base. The medic who had held off an entire militia force with precision shooting that seemed almost supernatural. People whispered when she walked by. They stared. Some looked at her with awe, others with curiosity, a few with something that looked like fear. She hated all of it. Captain Barnes tried to talk to her several times, but she avoided him. Command wanted a full report. She gave them the basic facts in writing, left out the emotional devastation, declined to elaborate. They wanted to commend her, maybe give her a medal. She refused. She didn't want recognition for using a weapon. She didn't want to be celebrated for the things she had spent 3 years trying to forget. Chen and Williams both recovered from their surgeries. They tried to thank her, but she couldn't accept their gratitude. She had saved them, yes, but she had also failed Jackson, and she had broken the promise she made to herself and to Tommy's memory. At night, she dreamed about the firefight. But in her dreams, the faces looking down her rifle scope weren't faceless militia fighters. They were Tommy, looking at her with confused hurt, asking why she had picked up a gun again after everything that had happened. She stopped sleeping well, stopped eating much, went through the motions of her job but felt disconnected from everything. Other medics noticed but didn't know how to help. How could they understand? They saw what she had done as heroic. They didn't understand that it felt like betrayal. 2 weeks after the incident, Elena was in the medical tent changing bandages on a recovering patient when Captain Barnes walked in. He waited until she finished, then approached quietly. "We need to talk, Rodriguez. Really talk." "There's nothing to say, sir." "I think there's a lot to say, and I think you've been carrying something heavy for way too long." He pulled up a chair. "I'm not leaving until you talk to me." Elena stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly the dam broke. She told him everything. About growing up at the range, about teaching Tommy to shoot, about his death and her guilt, about the vow she made and the 3 years spent trying to be someone different, about how picking up that rifle felt like betraying everything she had promised herself. Barnes listened without interrupting. When she finished, her face wet with tears, he was quiet for a minute. "Can I tell you what I saw that day?" he finally said. "Because I think you need to hear it." She nodded, unable to speak. "I saw someone who had a choice between letting everyone die and breaking a promise to herself. And she chose to save lives. I saw someone who had a weapon in her hands and could have killed 20 people easily. I've seen your shooting. Rodriguez, you could have done it. But instead you fired maybe 30 shots and not one of them was lethal. Not one. You could have justified it. Self-defense, defense of others, we were being attacked. But you didn't." He leaned forward. "You know what that tells me? That tells me your brother's death didn't make you a killer. It taught you the value of life. And when you had to pick up a weapon again, you used it the only way you knew how. To protect people. That's not betraying your vow, Rodriguez. That's honoring it in a way most people never could." But I promised never to touch a gun again, Elena whispered. You promised yourself you'd never hurt anyone again, Barnes corrected gently, and you didn't. You saved 13 civilians, including a little girl who would have bled out without you. You saved 4 soldiers who would have been overrun. You did that not despite your past, but because of it. You found a way to use something that caused you pain to prevent pain for others. Elena wanted to believe him, but the weight of guilt was so heavy, so familiar, that it was hard to let go. Your brother, Barnes said. You taught him to shoot, right? She nodded. Did you teach him because you wanted him to hurt people? No, never. I taught him because it was something we loved, something we shared. I taught him safety, respect, discipline. Then his death wasn't your fault. Someone else pulled that trigger. Someone else made that choice. You taught him something that could have been used well or badly, and someone else used it badly. That's not on you. The words hit something deep inside. Elena had spent 3 years blaming herself for putting a gun in Tommy's hands, as if that had somehow caused his death. But Tommy hadn't shot anyone. Tommy had been trying to help someone. And the person who killed him had made their own choice, one that had nothing to do with the hours Elena had spent teaching her brother to respect weapons and use them safely. I need to ask you something, Barnes continued. That day in the village when you picked up the rifle, what were you thinking about? Elena thought back to that moment. The terror, the impossible choice, little Amira crying in the corner. I was thinking about everyone I was about to lose, she said slowly. I was thinking about Amira asking me to save her. I was thinking about my promise to her and how I couldn't keep it if I didn't do something. Not about your brother? No, not then. I thought about him after. But in the moment, I was just trying to save people. Barnes nodded like she had just proven his point. Because you're not defined by one thing, Rodriguez. You're not just someone's sister or just a marksman or just a medic. You're someone who learned different skills at different times, and when it mattered most, you used all of them to do what needed doing. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something rare. Over the following weeks, Elena started attending counseling sessions. She talked about Tommy, really talked about him for the first time in years. She talked about the guilt and the grief and the impossible weight of trying to be someone completely different from who she had been. Slowly, painfully, she started to understand what Barnes had told her. Her skills weren't good or evil. They were just skills. What mattered was how she chose to use them, and in the moment when it counted most, she had chosen to save lives without taking them. She visited Williams and Chen in recovery. This time, when they thanked her, she let herself accept it. She even managed to smile. You know, Chen said, I've been thinking, the way you shoot, the way you see the battlefield, you could teach other medics how to survive in combat zones. Not to turn them into fighters, but to give them the awareness to stay safe, to understand what's happening around them. The idea took root. Elena started developing a training program, tactical awareness for medical personnel. Not combat training exactly, but teaching medics how to read a battlefield, how to move under fire, how to position themselves to do their jobs while staying alive. It was a way to use her unique combination of skills to help others, to give medics a better chance of making it home. 3 months after the incident, Elena received word that little Amira had fully recovered and been reunited with her surviving family. The girl had drawn her a picture, a crayon drawing of a woman in a medic's uniform with angel wings. The caption, translated by someone, read, "The brave doctor who kept her promise." Elena taped the drawing above her bunk. She looked at it every morning and sometimes in the evening when the guilt tried to creep back in. 4 months later, she got a package. Inside was a letter from Jay,